These readers will experience the novel as a work of art and realize that although the tragic life of Michael Kay is situated in South Africa, his problem today is a universal one, not limited to South Africa. Mrs. Scalz lists some questionable passages, but she argues that they are functional. She writes, "The description of fellatio is not in the least offensive," unquote. Her recommendation that the book be passed was rubber-stamped all the way to the top. So much for the censor's reports on these three books of mine. Now, who were these censors? If we have at the back of our minds a picture of the professional censor, it is probably of some lowly, nondescript male bureaucrat who comes to work punctually at 8:30 in the morning and spends the day paging through books, underlining offending passages in red ink and stamping pass or ban on the cover. Or else who pores over strips of film with scissors in hand, ready to snip out images of naked bodies. Someone who, when the clock strikes 5, locks up the office, catches a bus home to some anonymous suburb, and spends the evening watching bland television before donning his pajamas and falling into a dreamless sleep. Or if we're thinking not of professional censors, but of part-time censors, people who supplement their income by doing a bit of censoring in their free time, then we might guess that social workers, retired teachers, clergymen, and moral busybodies in general would be attracted to the craft. But according to the archival records, the South African censors did not conform to these stereotypes. Who exactly were the half-dozen people who had secretly, that is to say without revealing their identities, sat in judgment on my books? Well, Anna Bassel was a writer by profession, a considerable novelist in the Afrikaans language, probably one of the half-dozen best in the country, the winner of a number of prestigious awards. She wrote under the name Anna M. Lowe. She was also the mother-in-law of a colleague of mine at the University of Cape Town, an eminent microbiologist. In fact, I knew her slightly. One day, without preamble, I received a telephone call inviting me to tea at her suburban home. There were just the two of us. I remember we had a long discussion about the state of letters in South Africa. I had not the faintest idea of the true relation between us, namely that she was one of my censors, until the day these documents signed by her landed on my desk, by which time she was deceased. Reginald John Lytton had been a professor at the University of Cape Town, a specialist in educational theory, at the time when I was an undergraduate student there in the 1950s. I had never had any reason to speak to him. H. van der Merwe Scalz, the chairman of the committee that passed In the Heart of the Country, was professor of Afrikaans language and literature at the University of Cape Town at the time when I was a lecturer in English at the same institution. It so happened that Professor Scalz also owned a holiday home in a small country town named Grayton, where my parents briefly lived. Professor Scorts once invited all of us for a barbecue in his backyard, and he was very friendly to us, very genial. Mrs. E.M. Scorts, reader of Michael Kay, was his wife, Rita, our hostess on that occasion. Finally, F.C. Fensham, I never met in person, but he was Professor of Semitic Languages at the University of Stellenbosch, 50 kilometers from Cape Town. All these people from Cape Town. Well, the Directorate of Publications was based in Cape Town, the city where I was born and where I lived most of my life. Therefore, it is not strange that the Directorate should have drawn for its committees on people living in or near Cape Town. And the intellectual community of the 1970s and 1980s was not large, particularly if you limited the pool to whites. Whether it was written into the legislation that censors had to be white, I don't know, but the fact is that only whites were chosen. One consequence of that fact was that I, so to speak, rubbed shoulders daily with people who were in secret, or at least in secret to me, making judgments about whether or not I was going to be allowed to be published and read in my native country. Furthermore, without divulging their bureaucratic identities, these people did not find it strange to have cordial social relations with me and presumably with other writers on whom they were privately sitting in judgment. As I said, I was completely taken aback when Dr. Wittenberg revealed all of this to me. I was even shocked. But after reflection, I decided that my surprise was naive. And now I come to the point. The censors charged with reading and reporting on my books, Mrs. Bussell, Professor Lighton, Professor Fensham, Professor Scorts and his wife, seem to have regarded themselves not just as guardians of the morals and security of the country, but as guardians of the Republic of Letters too. If I read their reports correctly, they in effect pronounced me not guilty of attempting to undermine the morals and or to subvert the security of the state on the grounds that I was a bona fide citizen of the Republic of Letters. That is to say, that my loyalties were to this otherworldly republic, not to some alien ideology. Certainly I, as a writer, might regard them, as my censors, as the enemy, but in their eyes, they were on my side. They were interposing their expert judgment between me and the rigors of the control of publications law, which in cruder, less expert hands than theirs might have been deployed to ban my books because I, now and again, used obscene language or made unkind references to the police.